Hello, how are you? It's Jeannie. I hope you're well. Today's video I'm excited for, and it's actually one that has been requested, and it is all about making sourdough bread. The version that I use, the recipe that I more or less use, how I do it. You guys have asked me for some cooking videos, and I'll tell you, cooking videos aren't always the easiest because there are so many steps, and I only use one camera. I have more, but I only use one. And I'll do something and then realize I forgot to turn on my camera. So it's like, it's not as easy as sitting down and just going blah, blah, blah. But I was going to make some sourdough bread. I thought about this maybe 10, 12 days ago. And I make sourdough bread every few months. Maybe not even as often as that recently in this past year because we don't eat a lot of bread. But the bread we do eat, I want to be delicious. If we're going to indulge in bread and butter, I want it to be the best. Now, many people are intimidated by making bread and sourdough bread. And I've talked to you before. I've done another video and I'll link it up here. I think it's up here. I'm not sure which side. Anyway, I'll link that, and that's just for a basic, easy, everyday, delicious bread. And so many of you made it and enjoyed it and said it was wonderful, so that made me very happy. So definitely continue to use that recipe for regular bread. And you can shape it any way you want, as a loaf, a round loaf, or in a bread pan for sliced sandwiches. Sourdough is different, and it requires more patience, a little more understanding, but it's very, very good. So today's video is me explaining in my long blah 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 way. So you can just tune out and fall asleep if you want to, or you can watch it and maybe try it. But it's me explaining what I do. And sourdough bread, believe it or not, all bread baking is, it doesn't have to be as intimidating as you think. With a little practice, sometimes something will flop. You make notes and you change it next time. It's that easy, really. I'm going to give you a few tips of mine that have made it easier for me and hopefully less intimidating for you. Now, bread baking and sourdough bread baking, as I said, requires patience and understanding. And it's kind of like, and I was thinking about this when I was making it, it's kind of like having a child. What? Well, particularly with sourdough, and I'm going to show you how to make the starter. And there's this, this period of time you do something, you mix something together, you let it wait and rest, and it's supposed to do something, and then you're supposed to do something else. But wait, it didn't do what it was supposed to do. And I thought, that's very much like kids sometimes. Kind of like, what makes a kid sleep all night, through the night? If you're a parent, you can't answer that. You don't know. Because sometimes they sleep all night and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have a bad dream. Sometimes they wet the bed. Sometimes they're hungry. They need another glass of water. And so on and so on and so on. And that's just one thing. There is no exact parenting that works for every single kid. And making bread is the same way. Every time you make bread, it's a process unto itself, okay? And so sometimes you do great, yay, and sometimes it's like, maybe I shouldn't do it that way next time. Just like raising kids or pets or whatever. Apply it wherever you want, fill in the blank, okay? But not much in life is an easy recipe that is 100% that recipe every single time. And in speaking about children, I was thinking also too, and with regard to bread baking, when my kids were teenagers, I started struggling with trying to control everything. I wanted them to avoid having hard lessons, some of the ones I had in life. I wanted to make things, easier for them, but by having them make smart decisions. And if I knew the answers because I've already been there, I can give them those smart decisions, right? Yeah, sure. Tell me a teenager that listens to their parent all the time. Anyway, I started really getting this controlling panic. They're going out. They're going out with friends. I don't know what they're doing, who they're with, where they're really going, da-da-da-da-da, because I'm remembering me as a teenager. And it started becoming a real anxiety thing for me. I'd lie awake at night, when they were a little bit, older teens. It's like, they're not home. Where are they? I'd call the phone when phones started coming out. They're not answering their phone. And so on. And I would just lie awake all night, freaking out over things that hadn't happened, freaking out over perceived things that could happen, right? Because we all know it's kind of a scary world out there sometimes. And we had already lost a son, as most of you know, not all of you. And that was something completely out of my control. There wasn't anything I could have done to have changed that car accident. Nothing. But from that point on, I started worrying more about the other kids and trying to control circumstances that I couldn't. And so for me, talking about it with someone really helped me to let go of things I couldn't change. And I know some of you have things like that going on in your life. There's the past you can't change. There are events that have happened you can't change. And letting go of those is really hard. Putting down that luggage that you carry around. And the reason I bring this up is because today's sponsor is BetterHelp, betterhelp.com. First, you go to their site and answer a few questions, and they match you up with a therapist who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. They are trained to listen and give unbiased advice. You can do it all from your phone or chat or messaging, however you feel it is most comfortable for you. It's the easiest way to start talking to a therapist. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you all from the comfort of your own home. So go to betterhelp.com/GenieB and check them out, or choose Genie B when you are signing up and enjoy a discount on your first month. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video with this extremely important message. So if you do have struggles, check them out. So when I started the process of making my sourdough bread, the first thing I do is I go to my fridge and I take out my starter, Gertrude. Gertrude is old and has been around, and it was given to me decades ago by a friend. And I've kept Gertrude alive and well. Well, Gertrude was missing. And I had just fed her like 3-4 weeks before that. And yes, you can put them in your fridge and forget it for a while. And I've let it go even longer than that. So don't worry about that whole thing. It has to be fed every day. I'll go into that coming up. But she was missing. She was completely gone. And we had our grandkids here, and I thought they wouldn't have gone into the fridge and thrown Gertrude out. It just, what could have happened? I cleaned out the fridge, I washed the shelves, my husband helped look for Gertrude. We looked in both refrigerators, couldn't find her. So I thought, I've got to make a brand new starter. I was so bummed out because she had so much character. She had been through so much. We drove her here, wrapped up and put on ice from California to Texas. And as a starter goes through its various phases and ages and stresses, it develops character and a particular smell. And I'll come back to kids again. Do you know when a brand new baby has that particular smell? It's unique to that baby, and every baby smells a little different. Same thing with starters and their ages. So I was bummed that I had to start all over. But I thought, okay, I will. And I'm going to take this opportunity to show you how to start your own starter and feed it and keep it alive. A sourdough starter, is very hard to kill. Okay? So be easy on yourself. It's so hard to kill it if with just a little bit of care. In other words, you can be a really bad parent. So I took all the photos of everything I did, little video clips, and I put it onto my laptop. And what I'm going to do is show you the pictures while I explain it, sometimes in voiceover and sometimes picture in picture. Okay? And I hope that will help you feel not so intimidated and willing to give it a try, because it's not hard. It's not hard. It's just a little time consuming. That's it. Okay? And I even have a few shortcuts that I'm going to show you too. And if anything, this is just a long blah, blah, blah that you can tune out to and listen to me in the background talking about bread and flour. Okay? So, now, where? I'm going to have to put on my glasses. Okay, here we go. Hopefully you don't get too much glare from the lights. So what do you need to make a starter? Now remember, in regular bread, you use yeast, a packet of yeast, or I've got it in bulk, but you used yeast, and it gets activated when you give it some warm water, and or some warm milk, and a little bit of sugar, okay? And that wakes it up, and it's very active. That is a commercial yeast. In sourdough, it's wild yeast that is fermenting, so it's much slower, but it's basically your environmental yeasts. And yes, unless you live in a sterile dome, there are wild yeasts all around us everywhere. And so that is what is being incorporated, and starting to develop, and I'll explain that. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, it's important to have, maybe I can do it without my glasses. It's important to have a scale, like a digital scale, and a digital scale that has grams, because grams are easier to use and a little more accurate in smaller amounts than ounces. So if you can get a digital scale, do. If you don't, just remember, people who came over here, our forefathers and foremothers and ancestors and whatnot, made sourdough without any scales at all. So don't sweat it, okay? So we're going to start off with bread flour, which is basically a stronger flour than regular all-purpose flour. And I also use a little bit of whole wheat flour in my starter to give a little more character and a little more depth, bringing in the whole wheat, like about 10%. So if you use 90% regular bread flour and 10% whole wheat, that's a good combination. And then whatever, so we're going to use about 8 grams of bread flour, strong flour, and about 2 grams of whole wheat flour. Now, what kind of flour, you ask? Unbleached and organic, if at all possible. And for me, I particularly like European flours because, and I'll show you this. It's by Francine. This is what's called a T55, which is stronger than a T45. T45 is it's a finer dough for finer breads or pastries, things like that, more delicate. Now, what I typically use is a T65, but I didn't have any, so T55 works just fine. Now, there are other brands. Einkorn is also by Jovial, another brand I use. And the reason I like European flours, Italian, French, just about anywhere else, is they don't use things normally that we do that aren't good for us. For instance, glyphosate. When you buy regular flour, most of it, American flour, is they use glyphosate, which is basically Roundup, which is a weed controller. And now, even in American flour, organic flour, glyphosate is still used after or before harvest, maybe not during the planting, but it's in the soil. And I am it's hard to find a maker where glyphosate is 0 all year round. And they don't use that in Europe, in Germany, in France, in Italy. So now, what are the health detriments of glyphosate? I don't know completely, but it is purported to change our natural gut biodome. And there are more gut issues in Americans than there are in Europeans. And they're thinking that maybe this glyphosate, and I'm not saying there is, but things I've read are starting to link it to things like Roundup, glyphosate. And so I would just rather my flour, my wheat, come from a completely organic field, okay? But if you don't buy European flour, buy organic, unbleached, okay? Organic and unbleached. It's a little bit more money, but it's better. Don't get the bleached because it's bleached. It's the chemical process to whiten it. You don't need it white. So that's a long blah, blah, blah about that. But to make your starter, you need 10 grams of flour, and 8 of those 10 can be bread flour, and 2 grams can be wheat flour. Okay? And so you just get a container and you add 8 and 10 until it gets to 10 on your scale, and then you add the equivalent amount of water. So 10 grams of flour and 10 grams of water. Unfiltered water is best. If you are in an area where it's highly chlorinated or fluoridated, fluorinated, just use distilled or filtered water. That is best. Okay, so 10 and 10, and then you're just going to mix it up. Okay, get to my pictures here. You're going to mix it up, put a cover on it lightly. Let's say you start this at 8 or 9 in the morning. You leave it for a full 24 hours and come back to it a day later, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to add 10 more grams of flour, and 8 of those can be, 8 or 9 of those can be the bread flour, and 1 or 2 of those can be the whole wheat. Okay, and you don't have to be exact. And then the same amount of water, so 10 and 10. Okay, now, this is where it becomes like a child again. As it starts to grow and ferment, you're going to start seeing bubbles. You may see a little bit rising, which is why you want to use a rubber band around the base so you can monitor how much it's rising. Depending on the temperature of your kitchen, the humidity of your kitchen, the dryness, how warm it is, how cold it is, it may be faster, it may be slower. This is like how it comes back into being a kid, trying to raise a kid. Every kid is different. So if you look at it and absolutely nothing has happened, feed it again, give it 10 grams of flour, 10 grams of water, stir it up, and wait another 24 hours. And you're probably going to see at least a softening, almost like a liquefying. Now, you do that for, say, 3 or 4, maybe even 5 or 6 days, every 24 hours. As you're adding more, you may see a lot of sudden growth. Well, it may get hungrier sooner than the other one. So you might be doing it at 8 in the morning, but then also 12 hours later in the evening, 6, 7, 8 o'clock. There isn't an exact, it's this amount of time, boom, set the timer. All right? It's look at it. Is it responding? Is it eating? Is it growing? Is it bubbling? That's what you want, is activity. And every starter takes a different amount of time. So let's say you're adding 10 grams of flour and 10 grams of water every day and stirring it in. You're adding more quantity, right? So it's going to start growing just in quantity, but it's also going to start activating with the room yeasts. You don't want to seal it off completely. Keep the lid kind of loose, or at least have a jar where there's enough air in it. You don't want it anaerobic. You want, some aerobic activity. At this point, when you're seeing growth and you're seeing activity, now you're going to be feeding it slightly differently. You're going to be taking some out and using a certain portion and then starting over from there. So let me show you. As you can see, I get a lot of help from my kitchen supervisors. You know, we used to shush them off, whisk them off the counters, but they stay up, away from, more or less away from the food. But, you come to my house and there's, it is what it is. I'm sorry. Not sorry. My cats rule. So, okay, so let's move forward. You can also pop your, if it's very cold outside, you could pop your container into your oven on off, but just with the light on, and that might give it a little warmth to help speed up, because temperature is a factor in fermentation, but you don't want it too hot, okay? So maybe the light on for an hour and then off for a few hours, on for an hour or two, depending on how hot your light bulb gets. Every oven I've had differs, so just kind of keep an eye on it. The perfect temperature for fermenting, a wild yeast like this into a starter is like 75 to 85 degrees. So if you have to, stick a thermometer in there. Okay, so now stuff is happening and you're starting to see activity and it's starting to grow. You may need a bigger container at this point. So let's go. Okay, so here you see me make it into a bigger container, set my rubber band, and I'm going to set it off there for another night. Now, here's the thing. I did this in the morning, and look at it about 8 o'clock, and you can tell it's darker. I'm just using my phone, my iPhone, to film this. I didn't bring my camera and tripods and lights downstairs. It's just my iPhone. So there it is. And so what you're looking at here is a very active, growing, eating, healthy starter. Now, and then if you don't do anything, it will actually, overtake your container. So at that point, it's time to reduce it and feed it again. And at this point too, depending on how many days you've done your feeding, you're developing character to your starter. I say give it 4, 5, 6 days of doing this over and over. Okay, when it's super active, now we're going to do 1 to 2 to 2. So 1 part starter to 2 parts flour and 2 parts water. So 50 grams of starter, 100 grams of flour, and 100 grams of filtered water. We're going to mix all that, put it into a larger container because we know we've got good activity going on. Mark it with your rubber band and wait. And this is 24 hours and you see good activity here. You see lots of bubbling. And so now I'm going to take 50 grams again. This is the next day. This is probably like, for me, day 6, maybe day 7. And then I'm going to do another 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. Put it back in and feed it. And of course, this is Sputnik. He has to approve, and he does. Okay, and so the cats are going to give each other some love. And now I'm going to do my final mixture. So 50 grams of starter, 100 grams of flour, and 100 grams of water. Put it into my container. And you just discard the other stuff, or you can start a different jar and do the same thing and give it to somebody. In sourdough bread making, there's a lot of discard but there are recipes you can use that for, like sourdough pancakes and fritters and things like that. So if you're creative, you can find uses for your sourdough discard. But we're only using 50 grams of what we've created and then creating more. Okay, so now I've got some activity here, and I'm just going to stick it in my fridge. That's it. We're done. So the next morning is going to be my bread baking morning. So I put away my starter into the fridge because temperature retards the growth. I want to grow it slowly. It doesn't halt it, it slows it. But the bacteria are still doing their thing and creating character. The yeast is fermenting, so it's still a good thing. It just slows it way down. Well, when I put it away, I moved some things around, and guess what? I found Gertrude. It's like I cleaned my fridge out. I cleaned it by moving everything, and I didn't have much in there. From one side, wiping it down, moving everything to the other side, wiping it down. I must have missed her. So I found her. She was fine. I took her out, took 50 grams of her, added flour and water, and started a second fermentation. So I have the old and the new, and I did both of them, and I compared, and she has the best smell. So that's why you want to really try to stick with one. Let it age and age. So the next morning, here is the new starter on the left, and there's Gertrude on the right, and you can see I've got quite a bit here. So I'm really happy, and so now look how happy that is. That's the new starter. So what I'm going to do is now start my sourdough bread. And so I will put what I do in the description, okay? It's very easy. Just don't overthink this. I know this is a lot of blah, blah, blah. And I know I'm talking fast, which I tend to do when I'm explaining a big thing. So I'll try to keep myself slowing down. But I'll put the instructions in my description, so don't stress about it. And so what I have here is about 800 grams of a strong white flour, bread flour, organic, unbleached, 10 grams of salt, and about 460 milliliters, and you can do that by grams because milliliters of water weigh the same as grams, and 320 grams of your sourdough starter. So that's what's going to go into this bowl. So 800 grams of flour, 10 grams of salt, 460 mLs or grams by weight of filtered water, and 320 grams of a sourdough starter. Now this is for 2 smaller loaves, like medium loaves, not great big ones, but if you're going to make one, you may as well make 2. And if you can't eat it, you can put it in the freezer or give it to a neighbor. So I typically always make 2. So that's what this recipe is for. Yes, you can cut this in half if you wish. Okay? So you add the flour to a clean mixing bowl. You mix the salt through the flour and add the water and then the sourdough starter, and you mix it and combine it all together to form a rough, shaggy dough. Okay? Just like that. And I use this scraper, a bowl scraper, to mix it all. It's easier than a spoon and you get more. Okay, here's where the genie part comes in. I have seen and tried and done it where you let it rest for half an hour and come back and do a series of stretching it and folding it, stretching it and folding it. Let it set for half an hour, come back and do this. I I thought about this and I thought, that's not how our ancestors probably did it. They were like in a hurry. They've got kids, they've got, things going on. They've got farms and chores and, the old days. I want to do it for the most part all at once, with one minor rest in the middle. Okay? Not an exact science. And so I take it out of the bowl and I just start pushing it and stretching it, pushing it and stretching it. It's very sticky, and at this point it's very easy to want to add flour to make it less sticky. Don't do it. The bread, this wet dough, will gladly soak up that flour, but it's going to make it tough and it's going to make it dense, and you don't want that. The wetter, the better, but it does make it harder to handle. Okay, I shouldn't say the wetter always the better. There's a give and take with that. So you're going to be pushing and stretching. Use your scraper, that flexible scraper. I mean, they're a buck at the grocery store. Get one and just use that. You're going to push and stretch and push and stretch, just like I'm doing here. And you see how the dough is starting to change? It went from like really rough and shaggy to the gluten is starting to form. The proteins are starting to break down and really develop that nice texture, smoother, silkier. And how long do you do this? As long as you need to. And that's, again, like raising a kid. How do you get a kid to sleep all night? Whatever it takes. You keep doing it and doing it until you see that change. It could be 6 minutes, it could be 8 minutes, it could be 10 minutes. So watch your dough. And one of the ways to check for readiness is by pulling it. It's called a window pane test. And when you pull it, it will hold together and not rip. And so I do a series of window pane tests. And at first you can see it just rip right away. It just tears. And there's not enough elasticity in it and it needs more. But just periodically, just put some oil on your hands and cut a chunk off and test it and see. And clearly mine is not ready. So I'm going to keep kneading. Not really kneading per se, but pushing and stretching, pulling back. And I am not doing that. Let it sit for half an hour. Do 4 folds. Sit for half. I don't have time for that. So see how it's starting to get really nice? Now watch this window pane test. Right there. See, it's starting to really look nice and not tear as easily. So I'm going to give it some more stretching and really working that. And you can just see it and feel it coming together. Okay, now here's another window pane test. I'm going to see. And you can tell that it's holding into a ball. That's the goal, is to get it into a nice, smooth ball. Okay, that window pane test looks really good. I've worked it. Do not flour your surface. Do not flour. Something to think about during this time. This is how not exact it is. I was making some food for a neighbor and her husband who were sick, and I had to get that out of the oven. It was a meatloaf, and I was doing mashed potatoes and making them a nice hearty meal and a salad. Well, that was ready, and I had to get it out. So I put my dough down and just let it sit for half an hour. So that did work for me. But I'm not doing those scheduled sit times. I just don't have the time for that. Okay. So you just want to make sure it doesn't dry out. So if you're going to let it sit, cover it with a piece of plastic or, at the very minimum, a tea towel. Okay? So now you put it in the bowl and you're going to let it rest for about 3.5 hours. I put a piece of just greased plastic on top of it to keep it from drying out. And you can see my husband come in after me, and he's cleaning up. He's my sous chef. He helps out. So here we are about 3 hours and 40, about 3.5 hours later. And you just pop that out, and let's take a look at that and see how nice it looks. Try it. Now you can start using a little bit of flour, not a lot. And you're going to prepare your bannetons, and that is how your bread is going to form. And you cut it in half, and you're going to put one in each banneton, these bread baskets, and this will give it that nice signature round lines. And so how I've prepared these so the dough doesn't stick is I dust it kind of heavily with rice flour, because rice flour won't absorb into the dough. You can use regular flour, but it might tend to get gummy or kind of chunky, so use rice flour. Great pro tip. Use rice flour, and you just line that banneton basket. And now when you're making the balls of dough, what you're going to do is do some folding and stretching and bending over it and just kind of tucking it all up into itself. You see how I do that? So I'm going to get it off my hands. So I'm going to fold it and fold it again and tuck it sideways and around, both sides. And then when you get it into a ball, you're going to take your hands or the bench scraper and just kind of pull it toward you like this and tighten that surface. That top is what you want nice and tight, because that's going to help it actually rise, okay? Because you're kind of stretching it out. And then you put it in face down onto the circles. You do it again with the second half, and you just stretch it kind of and fold it into itself, and then make that nice ball and pull it toward you like that. Get that nice taut and put it down, kind of pinch up the back of it, pinch, and you can even pull some of the sides in, and that's it. Cover it with some plastic, and now you're going to pop them into the refrigerator overnight. So this is the evening, maybe 7 o'clock, and I'm putting it into the fridge overnight, and I'm going to cook this tomorrow morning. And so here it is. I'm still in my pajamas, which is boxers and a t-shirt. Sputnik has to give his approval. Get down, Sputnik. And so here we go. Now, you're not going to get a ton of rising, but you see that it is higher, you see, from before. And so now what we're going to do, and I use these silicone slings, and I love them. I get mine right off Amazon. You can see the brand there, Mod Kitchen. And so what you're going to do is take the silicone sling. You could also use parchment paper. You could use parchment paper. You want to preheat your oven at this point, and it's about 450, and I've got my cast iron Dutch oven in there, and I actually have a bread baking, oven on the left with the gray one. And you can spend a lot of money on those. You don't have to. You can just use your regular, Dutch oven. So you want to get those nice and hot. So now, what you're going to do is pull out those very, very hot pots. And you take your sling or your parchment paper and you invert the two loaves, and you're going to take a razor or lame, and you're going to score it. And this is necessary so that the steam escapes where you direct it to escape. And you want to do it at a 45, a nice sharp 45. And this is going to give it that nice ear, that nice lip. They call it an ear. And you can get really fancy and decorate. And so I give a couple scores, but you want a nice, quarter to half inch at a 45, nice big slash in there. And then you just lift those up, put them in the pots, cover them. And now here's the thing, you're covering it because that will create steam, its own steam. As the water starts to evaporate, you keep the lid on, and we're going to set it for about 20-25 minutes. And then pull it out and just take the lids off. And you can see how nice, whoops, it's very hot. And see that nice, that very nice ear on there? And so now we're going to cook it open for another 20 to 25 minutes. And again, you have to just watch it. So now I'm taking it out, and here are mine after 20, it was about 25 minutes. I actually should have gone about 3 minutes less because the bottoms were a little darker than my liking, but I think the top was just perfect. So you see with my one score and just a few slashes on the side how beautiful those came out. Now when you cut into it, now you want to completely let it cool, for at least an hour, hour and a half or two, because the steam is still slowly evaporating. You don't want to cut into it. You have to resist that, because if you cut into it too quickly, it will get gummy and thick in the center. So really resist that. And so see how nice that crumb is, and I've got some nice lift. And now you can add some really good butter and dig into it. This is when it's truly at its best, and I think I could actually eat a whole loaf. But look how beautiful that bread is. Now, if you have a pot, a cast iron Dutch oven big enough, and you want to do a big loaf, you can. And there are lots of different recipes that you can Google out there. I'm telling you that this is the one I use. I don't do those resting, 4, 5, 6, 7 resting, and then the, stretch and fold. You see how I do it? It makes it easier for me. If you do this, you can start to expand on techniques. Take notes of what worked, what didn't work. There are times my bread is flatter than others. The conditions are different in my kitchen. Or I didn't do enough flour, or I didn't knead it long enough or ferment it long enough. But just don't overthink it, Our ancestors who did this kind of bread baking didn't overthink it. As a matter of fact, they made bread, on a probably 2-3 times a week basis. And what they would do with their bowls with all the stuff in it, instead of washing it out, after they took the dough out, they just took the bowl and put it up on top of a counter until they were going to use it again. And it continued to ferment, dry out, but ferment. So it's don't be intimidated by this, all right? So I know this was a lot of information, and I hope you got some, good tips that will help you try it. Give it a shot. If you have any questions about what I did, I know I was kind of rapid fire going through this, email me or make a note in the, the comment, and I'll try and get back to you. But don't be intimidated. That's my message to you. Don't try to overthink it and over control it. And so anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you give it a try and let me know. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. Again, if you've got struggles that you would like someone to talk to about, check them out. Check on the link that I'm giving you. You can sign up using my name, Jeannie B, and really take advantage of that. Give it a try for 30 days and just see. For me, this bread baking is very therapeutic. When I'm doing those stretches and pulls and stretches and scraping, it feels so good. So, and the eating makes it all worth it. Okay, let me know what you think. Let me know if you're going to try it. I wish you all the best. I wish you bravery. Just do it. Just do it. I'm going to sign off. Thank you for being here in my life, and I will see you very soon in the next video. Bye for now.